Now we will be discussing a very important organ of our body called skin. Skin is our outer protective layer. It covers the whole body from head to toe. Skin of our body is like the four walls and the roof of our house. It protects our body from many external influences and harmful substances. So basically, skin is like a covering which covers our body from outside and protects it in many ways. Now, if we see the structure of the skin has a thickness of, on average, 1 to 2 mm. That means a very small thickness. 1 to 2 mm is not too thick. But the thickness of the skin varies from place to place. At certain places of our body, you will find skin is more thicker, and at some it's extremely thin. For example, the soles of our feet and the palms of our hand, the skin here is very much thick as compared to the other parts of the body. At certain places, the skin is extremely thin, like on the top of our eyelids. Here you can feel the skin is extremely thin. But on the average, if you analyze the whole skin, the average thickness is 1 to 2 mm. Now, the variation in the thickness of the skin is important because at certain places of our body, those portions are more prone to friction and mechanical damage. That's why the soles of our feet have a thicker skin, because we walk most of the time on that surface. So this surface, that is the sole of our feet, is subjected to a constant friction and mechanical pressures. Likewise, our hands also have a thicker skin on the palmar side, because it's with our hands that we perform different works, like we touch things, we hold things, we pull things. Here again, the skin is subjected to more friction and more pressure. That is why an extra protection is being provided through skin at these locations. And at certain places, because those places are subjected to the minimal friction or mechanical pressure, the skin at those places has been kept thin. Now, as far as the structure of the skin is concerned, it can be divided into two major layers. Outer layer is called as epidermis, and the inner layer is called dermis. So we can say the skin, which forms the exterior covering of our body, is composed of two major layers. On the outside is epidermis, and on the inner is dermis. This epidermis, which is the outermost layer of the skin, is further divided into many other layers. These layers are about 5, and they constitute: number 1, stratum corneum, stratum lucidum, stratum granulosum, stratum spinosum, and stratum germinativum. So these 5 layers basically form the outermost big layer, major layer of the skin, called epidermis. Now, stratum corneum is the most extreme layer of the skin. It's also called as the horny layer. The cells of this layer, that is stratum corneum, contain a fibrous protein called keratin. This protein is similar to the protein found in the horns of many animals. That's why this layer is sometimes called as horny layer, because the horns of the animals and this layer has the same protein, keratin. The cells of this layer, stratum corneum, are usually dead cells because of the pressure this layer constantly faces. Here in this diagram, if we make the structure of the skin, it can be divided into two major layers, outer epidermis and the inner layer dermis. This epidermis is further divided into five layers. The outermost layer, which consists of dead cells and a protein, keratin, is called stratum corneum or the horny layer. Below this layer, stratum corneum, is another layer called stratum lucidum. Lucid means clear. Because this layer appears translucent and homogeneous under a microscope, that's why it has been given the name of stratum lucidum, means a clear layer. This layer consists of flat epithelial cells. So, below the stratum corneum is a very homogeneous and clear layer called stratum lucidum. Below this layer, stratum lucidum, is another layer, stratum granulosum. This layer is composed of 2 to 5 layers of rhomboidal shaped cells, and the cells of this layer contain certain granules. So this gives this cell layer a granular appearance, hence the name stratum granulosum. So below the stratum lucidum is the stratum granulosum, and it appears that there are many granules in these cells, hence the name granulosum. Beneath this layer, stratum granulosum, is another layer, stratum spinosum. The cells in this layer have small protoplasmic projections which are spine-like. Like a thorn has many spines, similarly the cells of this layer, stratum spinosum, has spine-like protoplasmic projections. That's why this layer has been called as stratum spinosum. This layer is also called as prickle cell layer. So here beneath the granulosum is another layer which composed of the prickle cell layer. It has thorny projections, so it appears like this. Below this layer, stratum spinosum, is the layer stratum germinativum. Germination means to form. Because this layer forms the new cells for the skin, this layer has been called as stratum germinativum. This is the thickest layer among the 5 layers of epidermis. This layer, stratum germinatum, consists of many layers of cells. The cells which are superficial, that means above to the surface of the skin, they are polygonal. However, the deeper cells are either cuboidal or columnar in shape. Cuboidal shape means shape of a cube, and columnar cells are like columns, that means they are tall cells. So the superficial layers are polygonal and deeper layers are either cuboidal or columnar. This layer is also the thickest layer of epidermis. The cells of this layer produce new cells by the process of mitosis or cell division and add new cells to the stratum corneum, that is the superficial layer. So the last layer of epidermis here is stratum germinativum. This layer continuously supplies the skin with new cells, because the superficial layer of our skin is continuously shed off. Because of the friction and the work we perform, our skin cells on the superficial surface constantly fall off, and it is very important that this layer is replenished and supplied with more cells, and this is what here stratum germinativum does. You must have seen many materials and structures around you. You have also seen steel, you have seen wood, but if you subject even the steel, which is considered the hardest substance, to the friction, to a continuous friction, there will be a time when even the steel gets thinner and thinner until it breaks. But skin, our skin, which nature has bestowed us, is constantly used throughout our lifetime for a period of 60-70 years, and our skin never gets damaged. This is because of this layer, stratum germinativum. Because the cells that are damaged in the superficial layer, this layer continuously supplies it with the new cells by the process of mitosis, which means the cell division. Now, after this epidermis, which consists of 5 layers, the deeper layer of the skin is called as dermis. This dermis is basically a connective tissue layer. In our body, there are many tissues, and 4 types of tissues are called as elementary tissues or basic tissues. These are epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscular tissue, and nervous tissue. These 4 tissues combine to form many different other tissues as well as organs. But primarily and basically, these are the 4 basic tissues of the body: epithelial, connective, muscular, and nervous. So this dermis is basically from the type connective tissue. This connective tissue layer or dermis is made up of collagen fibers, histiocytes, and fibroblasts. Collagen fibers are basically fiber-like structures, small fibers made of a protein called collagen. That's why they are called as collagen fibers. They are white in color and are very much strong and to some extent also elastic. It is these collagen fibers that are present in this dermis give skin the strength and the elasticity. Besides the collagen fibers, it also contains histiocytes and fibroblasts. Fibroblasts are the cells of the connective tissue that form the collagen fibers. The collagen fibers basically are derived from the cells called fibroblasts, which are also present in this layer, dermis. Now, this dermis can further be divided into 2 more layers. One is the papillary layer, another is the reticular layer. Reticular layer is the deeper layer, and this is the papillary layer. Now, this is called as papillary layer because from here certain projections from this layer go into the epidermis. So these projections are called as papilla. That's why this layer is called as papillary layer, and deeper layer of the dermis is called as reticular layer. Now, this papillary layer contains blood vessels, lymphatics, and nerve fibers. Actually, the epidermis does not have any blood supply. The blood supply is present only in the dermis, and from here the nutrition is provided to the epidermis. Besides blood vessels, this papillary layer of dermis also contains lymphatics, that is lymph vessels, and nerve fibers. So the sensation which we usually get through the skin is also present in this layer of the skin. Then beneath this papillary layer is the deep reticular layer. This is called as reticular layer because it contains in abundance a fiber called reticular fibers. Like collagen fibers, which are also connective tissue fibers, reticular fibers are also connective tissue fibers. So this layer contains many reticular fibers, hence it's called as reticular layers. Besides the reticular fibers, it also contains elastic fibers. This is another connective tissue fiber called elastic fibers. These are also present in the deep reticular layer of the dermis, and these elastic fibers have the property of elasticity. That means these can be stretched, and it is because of these elastic fibers that our skin is extremely elastic and can be stretched to a certain extent. Besides these fibers, elastic fibers, the deep reticular layer also contains mast cells. Mast cells produce a local hormone called histamine, which is important in certain allergic reactions. Besides mast cells, it also contains nerve fibers and lymphatics. So, the structure of skin, in brief, can be understood that the skin is divided into two major layers, epidermis and dermis. Epidermis is further divided into 5 layers. The outermost layer is corneum, then lucidum, granulosum, spinosum, and germinatum. The layer germinatum supplies the skin with the new cells which are shed off during the due course of our work and other activities. Beneath the epidermis is the layer dermis. This is further divided into the superficial layer called papillary layer and the deep layer reticular layer. The nerve fibers and the blood vessels of the skin are limited to the dermis only. So we can say the blood supply to the epidermis is derived from the dermis, and further that the sensation of the skin is limited to the dermis portion of the skin. Now below this epidermis and dermis, there is another tissue called subcutaneous tissue. Now this subcutaneous tissue contains loose connective tissue. It also contains the fat, that is adipose tissue, and this layer which is beneath the skin called subcutaneous layer, which contains the fat in abundance, helps as a heat insulator. It's because of the fat which is present below the skin in the subcutaneous layer that provides insulation of heat to our body. Now this insulatory function of the skin is very important for maintenance of the body heat. Heat can be lost, is usually lost through the skin to the exterior. Our body loses heat to the environment through the skin. And here, by this subcutaneous layer, skin helps in restoring and retaining some amount of body heat inside the body, and this function is called as insulator function. Because this subcutaneous fat present in the subcutaneous tissue is more in the females, so females have more insulation properties than males. That means they feel less cold in winters than the males. Now we will also study, apart from the structure of the skin, certain other things called the appendages of the skin. These are hair follicles with hairs. You must have seen that our skin also has hairs on it. So these hairs are called as appendages of the skin. These hairs grow from our skin. Here you can see that a hair follicle is located in the dermis, and then the hair goes outside of the skin like this. Apart from the hair, other appendages are nails. Nails which we have are also the appendages or extensions or the modifications of the skin. Thus, the skin has two layers, the epidermis and dermis. Besides, there are certain appendages or modifications of the skin. These are hair follicles with hairs, nails, and two types of glands, sweat glands and sebaceous glands. Now in this diagram, you can see the two major layers of the skin, epidermis and dermis. In epidermis, you can see further 5 layers, and in dermis, you will see the sweat glands. It has two portions, one the coiled portion which lies deep in the dermis, and the tubular portion that opens to the exterior on the surface. You will also see in the dermis the hair follicle from which the hair erupts to the exterior of the skin. Besides, you will also see the blood vessels and lymphatics and nerve endings into the dermis. Now we will be discussing the glands of the skin, which we discussed earlier as appendages of the skin. First is the sebaceous gland. Sebaceous gland is basically an alveolar type of gland. In our body there are many types of glands, and on the basis of how these appear, we classify these glands into different types. For example, we have tubular glands, that means glands that have a shape of a tube. Alveolar glands or saccular glands, those glands that have a shape of a bag or a sac. So here the sebaceous glands are basically from the type of alveolar glands. That means they have a sac, and this sac further continues as a duct. These sebaceous glands are located in the dermis, as I said earlier, and they lie just on the side of the hair follicles, and they in fact also develop from the hair follicles, and the ducts of this sebaceous gland opens at the base of the hair near the hair follicle. Basically, this sebaceous gland produces a secretion, an oily substance called sebum, and this sebum moistens the hair follicles. This keeps the hairs moist and shiny. Besides, this sebum has also antibacterial and antifungal actions. That means they also resist the growth of bacteria and fungus on our skin. Now this sebum also goes on the surface of the skin. In this way, it keeps our skin smooth and oily. You must have seen in certain birds that the production of this sebum is many times more than the humans, and therefore their skin becomes almost waterproof because of the oily nature of the skin. You must have seen the birds, if you throw water on it, the water will not collect on their skin. Their feathers will not become wet because they have a lot of sebum production in their skin. In humans, the skin sebum also to a certain extent makes our skin not only smooth and oily but also waterproof. This is very important because it is through the water that many toxins dissolved in it can reach to our skin. So basically, sebum, sebaceous glands are the glands that are present in the dermis near the hair follicles, produce an oily secretion called sebum that keeps our skin oily and smooth. Another gland of the skin, and which is very important gland, is the sweat gland. Now this gland is the tubular type of gland. As I said earlier, that glands on the basis of their shape can be of different types. They can be sac-like when they are called as alveolar glands. They can be tube-like when they are called as tubular glands. So the sweat gland, which is present in the skin, is tubular gland. But this is not a straight tube, but this is coiled at certain portion. In the dermis, in the deep dermis, this sweat gland is coiled, and a long tube or the duct then goes through the dermis and epidermis and opens to the exterior. These sweat glands produce a secretion called sweat, and this sweat is very important for the regulation of the body heat, which we will discuss later. So the skin has two glands, sebaceous glands and sweat glands. Sebaceous glands, which are near the hair follicles in the dermis, produce sebum that help keep the skin smooth and moist. The other gland is the sweat gland that produces the sweat, which helps in maintaining the body temperature. Now, another important aspect of the skin is its blood flow. Every organ of our body has the blood flow, because without blood our tissues will not get the oxygen and the nutrients, and they cannot survive without blood. But the blood supply of the skin is special in the sense that every organ of our body is supplied by the capillaries, which originate from the small arterioles, which means that the small arterioles form the capillaries which supply blood to the tissues. Here in the skin, small arterioles not only form the capillaries that supply the skin, but these capillaries are also supplied directly from the big arteries, from the other arterioles into the capillaries. The special feature of the blood supply of the skin is that the blood vessels are distributed very profusely beneath the skin. It has a very large network of capillaries beneath it, and it has also a continuous venous plexus. That means a network of veins also extended beneath the skin on the whole area of the skin. And in most of the exposed areas of the body, like hand, feet, ears, etc., these areas are also supplied directly from the small arteries through arteriovenous anastomosis. Now, the blood supply of the skin is special in the sense that first, it is profusely distributed, second, it has arteriovenous anastomosis, and it has a continuous venous plexus. And this makes the blood flow of skin very important and special. The blood flow to the skin can vary from almost zero to about 30% of the cardiac output. That means the blood supply to the skin can vary from minimal to a very large amount of blood. This is very important, this blood supply of the skin, because when later we will discuss the heat loss from the skin, this blood supply, this variability of the blood supply helps a lot in regulating the loss of heat from the skin. So we can say that blood supply to the skin is very extensive and can vary from 0 to about 30% of the total blood that comes of the heart or the cardiac output. Now, after understanding the structure of the skin, its appendages and the blood supply of the skin, now we will try to see different functions of the skin. The first and the foremost and the most important function of the skin is the protective function. Because the skin covers our whole body, in this way it protects it from the external environment, from the hazards of the external environment. Our external environment contains different types of pathogens, chemicals, toxins that may reach our body. But it's because that skin covers our body from head to toe on all the portions. In this way, skin protects our body from the external influences and external hazards. Besides the bacteria and toxins, our body can also be exposed to the ultraviolet radiations from the sun. These ultraviolet radiations, which are found in the sunlight, is extremely harmful from our body. They are extremely harmful for our cells. So the skin forms a barrier by which it protects our internal organs from the effects of ultraviolet radiations. Another important function, which is important not only from the physiological point of view but also from the sociological point of view, is the sensory function. The skin is also a sense organ, and it is through the skin we perceive the senses of touch, pain, pressure, and temperature. We feel pain whenever something bites us, it is pricked upon by something, or extremely pressure is applied to it. Besides, we can also judge the temperature of certain things through this skin. The sense of temperature can, in certain conditions, save us from damaging our body. Suppose if I pick up a substance which is extremely hot and which can burn my tissue, if there is no skin, there is no sense of touch, I will pick it up and it will damage the skin. It's because that skin is there which can perceive the temperatures. I will avoid picking up the substances that are hot or that are extremely cold. So, besides providing the sense of temperature, pressure, and pain, it also protects our body and makes us able to avoid the things that are harmful for our internal organs. But among the sensory functions, what is most important is the sensation of touch. It's because of this touch that we can feel different things. We can feel the touch of another person. It's through this sense of touch that even we can feel the affection of the other person. Apart from the function of the sensory and protective, the skin also plays an important role in the regulation of water and electrolyte balance. Because the skin has the sweat glands which produce sweat, and this sweat contains water. And by regulating the amount of sweat, our body can regulate to some extent the balance of water inside our body. Besides the water, certain other electrolytes like sodium, potassium, chloride are also present in the sweat secretion, which can also be regulated to a certain extent. Also, the skin has an excretory function. It excretes certain harmful substances from the body, for example, urea. But the most important function, apart from protection and the sensations of touch, pain and temperature, it has an important role in the regulation of body temperature. Now, when we talk of body temperature, our body has two temperatures. One is the core body temperature, that is the temperature of the interior of our body, or the temperature of the internal organs of the body. This is called as core temperature, and this core temperature is always maintained at a constant of 37 degrees centigrade. It's very important that the internal body temperature of the body is maintained at a constant, because our body and cells and the functions of the cells are dependent on enzymes, and these enzymes are very sensitive to the temperature variations. The enzymes of our body work optimally at the 37 degrees centigrade, and any increase in this temperature or the decrease in the temperature can make these enzymes not functioning at all. So the maintenance of body temperature, especially the core body temperature, that is the temperature of the internal organs of the body, has to be maintained at a constant, and this core body temperature is maintained at a 37 degrees centigrade, and our skin plays a very important role in the regulation of this temperature. Another temperature which we talk regarding our body is the skin temperature or the surface temperature. Now, the skin temperature can vary according to the environmental temperature, and this temperature is not of the physiological importance. What is important for our body is the core body temperature, that is usually maintained at an average of 37 degrees centigrade. Now, when we talk of body temperature, one thing has to be kept in mind, that our body produces heat. This heat is the result of the metabolic processes that take place in our cells. Our cells, for deriving energy for their functions, use food and oxygen, and this process is called as metabolism. During this metabolism, apart from deriving the energy for various physiological functions, most of the heat is lost as heat. So we can say metabolism produces heat. Now, the heat generated in the body is variable. If the metabolism is more heat will be produced. Similarly, heat is also produced in our body by the muscles, because our muscles make a constant activity, make a constant motion, and by the friction of different muscle fibers, heat is constantly produced by our muscles. That's why you have seen when we do vigorous exercise, more heat is produced by our body. So our body produces heat. The increase in the heat production, either through the metabolism or to the muscles, can lead to the increase in the body temperature. However, at the same time, body has a mechanism to maintain the body temperature by losing the extra amount of heat. So in summary, we can say that the body temperature is maintained by balancing heat gain and heat loss. If inside our body there is extra production of heat, there will be extra loss of heat by the body. In this way, body regulates the body temperature. On the contrary, if there is less heat production in our body, the body will lose less heat to the exterior. In this way, will preserve heat and maintain a constant body temperature. So our body temperature, that is the core body temperature, is maintained by balancing the heat production and heat loss. Now, heat is actually produced by our internal organs, that is liver, heart, brain, etc. And heat loss is made to the environment. So the heat that is produced inside our body has to be sent to the exterior of the body so that the body temperature is maintained. Now, heat produced in the internal organs is first transferred to the skin, wherefrom the skin loses the heat to the external environment. So in this way, skin plays an important role in regulation of body temperature. The more of the amount of the heat is, if it is sent from the center to the skin, more heat will be lost by the skin. Similarly, if small heat is transferred from the internal organs to the skin, skin will automatically lose less heat to the environment. And this is here where the blood supply of the skin plays an important role. As I have mentioned earlier, that the skin blood supply is variable. It can vary from nearly 0 to 30% of the cardiac output. So whenever there is extra production of heat inside our body organs, the blood supply to the skin is increased. And it is through this increased blood supply, that extra amount of heat is carried from the internal of the body to the skin, and wherefrom skin loses the heat to the environment. So by varying the blood supply, by the variation of the blood supply in the skin, or by regulating the blood supply of the skin, by making it more or less, the body regulates the amount of heat lost to the surroundings, and in this way regulates body temperature. So it's because of this variation of the blood supply of the skin. Now, from the skin, the heat is lost to the exterior of the environment. Now, the heat loss from the skin to the exterior, to the external environment, takes place by 3 processes. Number 1 is radiation. Now, radiation means loss of heat from the skin to the exterior by means of electromagnetic rays or infrared rays. Our body, when produces heat and sent to the skin loses the heat to the surroundings by the radiation or the infrared rays. Now, here it's important to mention that every body that has a temperature, it loses heat through infrared waves. If the temperature, even this desk and even this computer also loses heat through infrared waves, which is called as radiation. When the temperature of the body is higher than the surroundings, more heat will be radiated from the body to the surroundings. But if the temperature of the surrounding is more, then more heat will be radiated from the surroundings to the body. In this way, the skin or the body loses heat by the method of radiation only when the temperature of the environment or the surroundings is lesser than that of the body temperature. But when the temperature of the surroundings increases and becomes more than the body temperature, then the body, instead of losing the heat, gains the heat by the means of radiation from the other objects and the surroundings. Second method of losing heat from the body or from the skin to the surroundings is conduction. Conduction is transfer of heat from the body to the objects that it touches. For example, the chair, this desk, the heat is lost through conduction to other objects in our surroundings through conduction, but this amount of heat loss constitutes only 3% of the total body loss. Now there is also conduction of heat from our body to the air, because air is also in touch with our body. So we also lose heat by the way of conduction to the air. Now the conduction of heat from the body to the air amounts of about 15% of the total body loss from the body. Here again there is a problem that when our body loses heat to the surrounding air, that is the air that touches our body, there is a time when the temperature of the skin of the body and the air becomes constant, and at that time the body stops losing heat to the air, unless and until the air that surrounds our body is taken away from it. You must have seen during the windy season, or when we use a fan, what actually fan does, it takes the air that surrounds our body, which has equaled the temperature of our skin, and takes it away from the body, so that our body comes in contact with the another air, new air that is colder, and therefore the body keeps on losing the heat through conduction to the air. But here again it is limited when the temperature of the air is less than the temperature of the body. Whenever the temperature of the surrounding air becomes higher than the body, then at that moment the body stops losing heat. Instead, it gains the heat from the exterior. Third method of losing heat from the body, and which is very important, is evaporation. During evaporation, the water that is lost from the skin, from the body, takes away the heat with itself. About 0.58 kilocalories of heat is lost when 1 gram of water evaporates from the skin. Evaporation is in fact the only way that helps our body to lose heat in extremely hot conditions, because in extremely hot conditions both the radiation method and the conduction method fail to lose the heat from the body. At that time, evaporation comes to our rescue and helps us in losing the body heat. Here again skin plays a very important role in evaporation, because skin produces the secretion called sweat, which contains water. Extra sweat production means that there is extra water on our surface of the skin, which when evaporates takes a large quantity of heat with itself. So in extreme summers, it is the evaporation, especially the evaporation of the sweat, that helps our body to lose heat. So the important functions of the skin, which we discussed: protective function, sensory function, regulation of water balance, and the most important function is the regulation of body temperature, that is losing the extra heat from the body to the surroundings, in this way maintaining the constant core temperature at 37 degrees centigrade. Another function of the skin is the synthesis of vitamin D. Our skin synthesizes vitamin D from cholesterol when ultraviolet light falls on it. That's why it is said that sunlight is very important for the formation of vitamin D in our body. Sunlight contains ultraviolet rays, which when fall on our skin forms vitamin D from an already present substance called cholesterol. This vitamin D in the skin is usually inactive form, which later gets activated in liver and kidney, and then later helps in the calcium metabolism.
We will be discussing about the anatomy of the brain. Everybody will be knowing brain. It's situated at the cranial cavity. So, brain it's having there are two cerebral hemispheres and there are two cerebellar hemisphere and a brainstem. So, brain is having three parts: cerebrum, cerebellum and the brainstem. Cerebrum is divided into two hemispheres. Cerebellum again divided into two hemisphere, and brainstem it is divided into three parts. These are midbrain, pons and medulla. Now, the medulla is the lower part of the brainstem. It is continuous with the spinal cord by passing through the foramen magnum. So, brain is having three parts: cerebrum, cerebellum and the brainstem. Brainstem again divided into midbrain, pons and medulla. Now, cerebrum. Cerebrum is divided into two hemispheres, and two hemispheres are connected by a tissue called corpus callosum. Then cerebrum is having three poles: a frontal pole, a temporal pole and an occipital pole. Now, it is having two sulcus called a central sulcus and the lateral sulcus, which divide the cerebrum into a frontal area, a parietal area, a temporal area and an occipital area. So, by two sulcus, central sulcus and lateral sulcus, divide the cerebrum into frontal area, parietal area, temporal area and occipital area. Now, the central sulcus lies between frontal and parietal lobe, and the lateral sulcus lies between frontal and parietal lobe upward and temporal lobe downwards. The posterior most lobe is called occipital lobe. Now, brainstem is having three different parts: midbrain, pons and medulla. Medulla is the lower part of the brainstem, extending from the lower border of the pons just above the first cranial nerve and continues as the spinal cord. So, at the junction of the spinal cord and the medulla and the medulla, this is the position of the starting of the first cranial nerve. Now, the medulla extends down through the foramen magnum as spinal cord. Now, the medulla is divided into right and left halves by anterior and posterior median fissure, and each half is further divided into anterior, lateral, posterior region and anterior, lateral and posterior region by anterolateral sulcus and posterolateral sulcus. The anterior region is in the form of long elevation. There are long elevation called pyramids. Pyramids is an important part of the cortico-spinal tract or pyramidal tract. The lower part of the medulla, right and left, in the lower part of the medulla, right and left pyramidal fibers crosses in the midline, forming a pyramidal decussation. So, lower part in the there is pyramids are there, and pyramidal fibers are there. Fibers of the cortico-spinal tracts are there. So, in the lower part of the medulla, these fibers cross and form the pyramidal decussation. Then, upper part of the left region shows an oval elevation called olive. Olive contain inferior olivary nucleus. Then, rootlets of the hypoglossal nerve originate from the anterolateral sulcus between the pyramid and olive. The rootlet of the 9th and 10th and the cranial part of the accessory nerve emerge from behind the olive. So, this hypoglossal nerve and the rootlets of the hypoglossal nerve between pyramid and olive, and 9th, 10th and accessory cranial part of the accessory nerve from behind the olive. Posterolateral region lies between the posterolateral sulcus and posteromedial fissure. Next part is the pons. Pons is the middle part of the brainstem, that is between the midbrain and medulla. It is having two surfaces, a ventral or anterior surface and a posterior surface. Ventral surface is convex with a vertical basilar sulcus which lodges the basilar artery. There is a basilar sulcus and where the basilar artery is situated. Lateral surface is continuous with the middle and cerebellar peduncle. With the lateral surface is continuous with the middle cerebellar peduncle, and trigeminal nerve is attached to the surface at the junction of pons and middle cerebellar peduncle. Abducens nerve, facial nerve, vestibulocochlear nerve are attached in the lower border of the anterior surface of the pons. So 6th, 7th and 8th nerve are attached at the lower border of the anterior surface. Now, pons contains several pontine nuclei which forms an important part of the cortico-pondocerebellar pathway. Pons contain corticospinal and corticonuclear tract also. Now, unilateral lesion of the lower part of the pons result in paralysis of the facial nerve on the side of the lesion and paralysis of the limbs on the opposite side of the lesion. That is, if there is unilateral paralysis of the pons on the lower part of the pons, there is paralysis of the facial nerve on the side of the lesion and paralysis of the limb on the opposite side of the lesion. This condition is called crossed hemiplegia. It is also called Millard-Gubler syndrome. So, crossed hemiplegia means it is the paralysis of the limb on the paralysis on the limb on the opposite side and paralysis of the face on one side and paralysis of the limb on the opposite side. It is due to the unilateral lesion of the lower part of the limb. It is due to the unilateral lesion in the lower part of the pons. It is also called Millard-Gubler syndrome. Next is the midbrain. It is also called mesencephalon. It connects the third and fourth ventricle, and it is the transverse section of the midbrain shows two parts, an anterior part and the posterior part. Next is the next important structure in the brain is the cerebellum. Cerebellum is situated on the posterior cranial fossa behind the pons and medulla. It is having two cerebellar hemisphere. It is having two hemisphere like cerebrum. The cerebellum is also having two hemisphere connected through a median vermis. So, central vermis is the connection between two hemispheres. Again, each hemisphere is divided into three lobes, that is an anterior lobe, a middle lobe and a small foculonodular lobe. So, cerebellum like cerebrum, it is having two hemispheres, and these two hemispheres connected by a vermis, and each hemisphere again divided into three lobes, that is anterior lobe, middle lobe and there is foculonodular lobe which is the smallest lobe, and this cerebellum is situated in the posterior cranial fossa behind the pons and medulla. Now, the anterior and there are three lobes are there. First of all, the anterior and middle lobe is separated by a primary fissure, and middle and foculonodular lobe is separated by posterolateral fissure. And we already discussed that there is a vermis which connect between two cerebellar hemisphere. Vermis can be divided into different parts. There are different parts in the vermis. These are lingula, central lobule, culmen, declive, folium, tuber, uvula and nodule. These are the different parts of the vermis. So, these are lingula, central lobule, culmen, declive, folium, tuber, pyramid, uvula and nodules are the different parts of the vermis. Now, functionally, we can divide the cerebellum into three. These are archicerebellum, that is functionally we can divide the cerebellum into three. These are archicerebellum, paleocerebellum and neocerebellum. Now, what are the functions of the cerebellum? First of all, its main function is it influence on voluntary activity. So, for a goal-oriented smooth execution of voluntary activity, the cerebellum, an intact cerebellum is necessary. That is, once we get a stimulation, once we get a impulse, then the body starts reacting, and the cerebellum is the structure which monitor the reaction, and if needed, the readjustment can be done, and it is done by the cerebellum. And second function is the maintenance of tone, posture and equilibrium. These are the main two functions of the cerebellum. The first one is influence on voluntary activity. The second one is the maintenance of tone, posture and equilibrium. Now, see if any lesions in the cerebellum occurs, this condition is called cerebellar syndrome. The causes may be a thrombosis of the feeding artery or a tumor either in the cerebellum or a cerebellopontine angle or any injury. This may cause damage to the cerebellum. So, once it is damaged, once there is a damage to the cerebellum, it affects its function also. We already discussed what are the functions of cerebellum, and a thrombosis of the feeding artery or a tumor or an injury causes damage to the cerebellum. Now, which are the signs and symptoms once there is a lesions to the cerebellum or injury to the cerebellum? The first thing is ataxia, and there will be disturbance in the voluntary movements. The next sign is that there will be dysmetria, that is, fails to attain the exact degree of contraction of the muscles. That is, there may be pause pointing. So, for example, while reaching for a glass of water, hands stop in the midway, or we overshoot the object. This is called dysmetria. That we are not able to, the person is not able to exactly find out how much distance it is. So, exact point we cannot. And while reaching a glass of water, hand stops in the midway or overshoot the object. So, dysmetria, it is also called pause pointing. Next sign is that there is an indentation tremor. That is, that no tremor at the rest. Once you start doing work, there will be tremor. This is called indentation tremor. That is, there is no tremor at rest, and once you are doing some work or something, then there will be tremor. This is called indentation tremor, and indentation tremor is just opposite to the tremor which is seen in the Parkinsonism. In the Parkinsonism, the type of tremor is the resting tremor. So, in case of cerebellar syndrome, there is cerebellar syndrome, there is indentation tremor, but in case of Parkinsonism, it is resting tremor. Next is dysarthria. Dysarthria means that is effect in articulation, various types of affecting articulation. So, the effects are, the type of speech is called the scanning speech. So, the person will stop while between the speech, there will be breaks and there will be loud noise. The speech may be slurred speech, explosive type of speech. He must stop in between the speech, and the sound, the voice may be more. So, this is called dysarthria. This type of speech is called scanning speech or dysarthria. Then the next sign is the nystagmus. It is especially due to the ataxia to the ocular muscle. Nystagmus means there is rhythmic oscillation movements of the eyes. So, this is called nystagmus. It is due to ataxia of the ocular muscle. Next signs and symptom is dysdiadokinesia, that is inability to perform rapid alternative motion. For example, he won't be able to perform rapid pronation and supination movement. This is called dysdiadokinesia. The person won't be able to perform the rapid alternative motions like pronation and supination. Then varying degree of hypotonia may be there, like tendon jerk, pendular tendon jerk may be there. Now, the equilibrium may be severely affected. That is, the gait type, the gait will be affected. As the equilibrium is affected, the walking way, the gait will be affected. The name of the gait is staggering gait or a drunken gait. The way the person walking is called here the drunken gait or staggering gait will be there in case of cerebellar syndrome. Now the posture. The posture will be like the tilting head towards the side of the lesion. So the signs will go through the signs and symptoms of the cerebellar syndrome again. The first one is the ataxia. Second one is the disturbance in the voluntary movements. Then dysmetria, that is past pointing, that person fails to attain the exact degree of contraction. That is, while reaching a glass of water, he stops in the midway. Then there may be indentation tremor, that is not tremor at the rest. While doing activity, there will be a tremor. Next is dysarthria, type of speech will be a scanning speech. Next one is nystagmus, that is sudden movements, sudden rhythmic oscillation of the eye. So it is due to the ataxia of ocular muscle, the ataxia of ocular muscle. Then next one is dysdiadokinesia, that is he won't be able to perform the rapid alternative motion like pronation and supination. Then varying degree of hypotonia like tendon jerk may be pendular type of tendon jerk. Then there will be staggering gait or drunken gait will be there, and the posture will be like tilting the head towards the side of the lesion. Now, how will you check the cerebellar function? So we can check, the first important thing is the coordination. We can check the finger nose. We can go for test for coordination is finger nose coordination, finger nose test. That we are asking the subject to touch his own nose and the examiner's finger. This is called a finger nose test. A person with cerebellar dysfunction won't be able to do this test. Next one is pronation and supination test. That is, the person with cerebellar dysfunction, there will be dysdiadokinesia and person cannot perform rapid pronation and supination. Then we are asking the tone and posture and equilibrium will get affected. So the person cannot walk in a straight line. We ask the subject to walk in a straight line. The person cannot walk. So this is the another test. We are asking the person to walk in a straight line. Then if the person is bedridden, we can go for a heel shin test. That is for bedridden person. That is, heel shin test can be done for in case of bedridden person. That is, we are asking the subject to move his heel towards the shin and again back in rapid motion. So we can test the cerebellar function by using these tests: finger nose test, pronation supination test, walk in a straight line test, and heel shin test, especially in case of bedridden patients.